My name is Jim Thomas, and until this Saturday, I considered myself a pretty chill guy. I live in a quiet, suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where the lawns are meticulously manicured, and everyone seems to know everyone else's business. I'm a software engineer, work from home mostly, and I find gardening to be incredibly therapeutic. It's my way of escaping the complexities of coding and connecting with something real and tangible. I'd spent the last few weeks planning out a new flower bed in my front yard. I envisioned a vibrant mix of colors and textures, a welcoming display for anyone passing by. I even researched native plants that would thrive in our climate and attract local pollinators. So, on this particular Saturday, I woke up with a sense of purpose. The sun was shining, the birds were chirping, and I was ready to get my hands dirty. I brewed myself a strong cup of coffee, threw on my oldest jeans and t-shirt, and headed out to the yard. I'd already marked out the area, tilled the soil the previous weekend, and had a truckload of compost delivered. The only thing left to do was plant. I started with the perennials, carefully spacing them according to the diagrams I'd drawn. I chatted with a few neighbors walking their dogs, sharing gardening tips and admiring each other's yards. Everything felt normal. Peaceful. I was in my element, lost in the rhythm of digging, planting, and watering. I distinctly remember thinking how lucky I was to have this little slice of tranquility in my life. Of course, that feeling was about to be shattered in a way I never could have imagined. I was humming along to a song when I heard this shrill voice cut through the air. It was the kind of voice that makes your teeth ache, laced with an unsettling blend of entitlement and malice. "What do you think you're doing?" the voice screeched. I straightened up, wiped the sweat from my brow, and turned to see the source. It was Karen Porter, my next-door neighbor. Karen was a walking stereotype, the kind of woman who weaponized her privilege and always seemed to be on the lookout for something to complain about. She'd given me the side-eye since I moved in, subtly making it clear that she didn't think I belonged here. I tried to ignore her, to be polite and neighborly, but she made it increasingly difficult. Her husband, bless his heart, seemed embarrassed by her behavior, but he never dared to contradict her. "Good morning, Karen," I said, forcing a smile. "Just working in my garden." Her eyes narrowed, and her lips curled into a sneer. "You're not allowed to do that," she declared, her voice dripping with venom. I blinked, completely taken aback. "Excuse me?" I asked, thinking I must have misheard her. "You heard me," she snapped. "This isn't your property. You have no right to be digging around here." I pointed to the clearly defined property line, the small survey marker I'd personally located to ensure I wasn't encroaching on her land. "Karen, this is my yard," I said, trying to remain calm. "I own this house. I'm allowed to garden on my own property." That's when the situation took a turn for the worse, spiraling into a bizarre and terrifying confrontation that would change everything. Karen's face turned a shade of red I didn't think was humanly possible. Her eyes bulged, and she started sputtering, words tumbling out of her mouth in a rapid, incoherent stream. "I've been watching you," she hissed. "You people always think you can just come in here and do whatever you want. This neighborhood used to be so nice, so clean, before." She trailed off, but the implication was clear. Before I moved in. Before a black man dared to occupy a space she deemed exclusively her own. I took a deep breath, trying to defuse the situation. "Karen, I don't know what you're talking about," I said, my voice measured. "I'm not bothering anyone. I'm just planting some flowers." She completely ignored me, launching into a tirade about property values, neighborhood aesthetics, and the alleged decline of society. It was a dizzying mix of racist tropes and veiled threats, all delivered with a level of self-righteousness that was truly astounding. I tried to reason with her, to explain that I was a responsible homeowner, that I contributed to the community, that I paid my taxes. But it was like talking to a brick wall. She was so consumed by her own prejudice that she couldn't hear a word I was saying. The volume of her voice increased, attracting the attention of other neighbors. I saw Mrs. Henderson, the sweet elderly woman across the street, peek out from behind her curtains. Mr. Johnson, the retired veteran who lived next door on the other side, came out onto his porch, his brow furrowed with concern. I felt a wave of embarrassment wash over me. I didn't want to cause a scene, to draw attention to myself. I just wanted to be left alone to enjoy my garden. "Karen, please," I pleaded, "can we just talk about this like adults? I'm not doing anything wrong." That's when she played her trump card. "I'm calling the police," she announced, pulling out her phone. "I'm going to tell them you're harassing me, threatening me. They'll deal with you." My heart sank. I knew that calling the police could escalate the situation in ways I couldn't control. I'd seen the videos, heard the stories. A black man minding his own business, suddenly facing the full force of the law, all because of a malicious lie. "Karen, don't do that," I said, my voice rising in desperation. "There's no need for that. I haven't done anything." But she was already dialing, her finger jabbing at the screen with manic energy. As she spoke to the 911 operator, her voice dripping with false distress, I felt a cold dread settle over me. I knew this was going to be bad. I just didn't realize how much worse it was about to get. I stood there, frozen, watching her weave her web of lies, feeling the weight of her prejudice pressing down on me. The perfectly normal Saturday I had envisioned was quickly turning into a nightmare. As Karen was on the phone with 911, her composure seemed to crumble further. The carefully constructed facade of polite suburbanite vanished, replaced by raw, unadulterated rage. She punctuated her lies to the operator with pointed glares in my direction, emphasizing her victimhood with dramatic sighs and exaggerated gestures. It was a performance, and a disturbingly convincing one at that. I could hear snippets of her conversation, phrases like, threatening behavior, and, feeling unsafe in my own neighborhood. It was all a complete fabrication, but I knew that didn't matter. All that mattered was that she was a white woman, and I was a black man. That dynamic, in the eyes of some, was enough to justify any accusation. I tried to stay calm, to remind myself that I had done nothing wrong. But the knot in my stomach tightened with each passing second. I knew that the police were on their way, and I had no idea how they would react. Would they see through Karen's lies? Or would they automatically assume that I was the aggressor? Suddenly, something snapped in Karen. The words she was spewing weren't enough. She needed to physically express her anger, to exert her dominance in a more tangible way. With a guttural yell, she lunged towards my flower bed. I barely had time to react before she began tearing out the plants, ripping them from the soil with savage force. Flowers I had carefully selected and lovingly planted were tossed aside like garbage. My meticulously arranged compost was kicked and scattered, creating a muddy mess. It was a scene of utter destruction, a visceral representation of her hatred. I watched in disbelief as she systematically destroyed my garden, my sanctuary, my little piece of peace. "Stop it, Karen!" I shouted, finally finding my voice. "What are you doing? This is my property. You can't do this." She didn't even acknowledge me. She was completely consumed by her destructive frenzy, her face contorted with a mixture of fury and glee. It was like watching a child throw a tantrum, but with far more malicious intent. As she reached for a particularly delicate rose bush, I instinctively moved to stop her. I didn't touch her, I didn't threaten her. I simply reached out to try and protect my plant. That's when she screamed. A long, piercing shriek that echoed through the neighborhood. "He's attacking me," she wailed, stumbling backward. He pushed me. He pushed me into the garden." She collapsed onto the ground, amidst the wreckage she had created, clutching her arm and feigning injury. It was a blatant lie, a desperate attempt to solidify her victimhood. But it was also incredibly effective. I saw Mr. Johnson gasp on his porch. Mrs. Henderson gasped even harder. The other neighbors who had gathered to watch the spectacle muttered amongst themselves, their faces a mixture of shock and confusion. Karen had successfully weaponized her vulnerability, turning the situation completely on its head. Now, I wasn't just a black man gardening in his own yard. I was an aggressor, an attacker, a threat to a helpless white woman. The sound of sirens grew louder in the distance. The police were almost here. And I knew, with a sinking certainty, that my nightmare was just beginning. The flashing lights of the police cars painted the scene in harsh reds and blues, transforming my quiet suburban street into a stage for a very public drama. 2 officers emerged from the vehicles, their faces grim and professional. I recognized them instantly. Officer Miller and Officer Davis. I'd had a few brief, polite interactions with them in the past, a friendly wave here, a casual chat about the weather there. They seemed like decent guys, but I knew that appearances could be deceiving. In situations like this, even the most well-intentioned officer could be swayed by prejudice or misinformation. As they approached, Karen launched into another torrent of accusations, her voice trembling with feigned emotion. She pointed at me, her fingers shaking, and recounted her version of events, painting me as a violent aggressor who had attacked her without provocation. She emphasized her supposed injuries, dramatically clutching her arm and wincing in pain. It was a masterful performance, designed to elicit sympathy and solidify her narrative. Officer Miller turned to me, his expression unreadable. "Sir, can you tell us what happened here?" he asked, his voice neutral. I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm and collected. "Officer, this woman is lying," I said, gesturing to Karen. "I was simply gardening in my front yard when she started harassing me. She told me I wasn't allowed to be here, that I didn't belong. When I tried to ignore her, she started destroying my flower bed. I never touched her. She's making all of this up." Officer Davis walked over to Karen, his expression skeptical. He knelt down beside her and examined her arm. "Ma'am, are you injured?" he asked. Karen winced dramatically. "Yes, officer," she said, her voice weak. "He pushed me. I fell into the garden. I think I might have sprained my wrist." Officer Davis's eyes narrowed slightly. He glanced around at the scattered plants, the muddy soil, and the overall disarray of the scene. Then, he looked back at Karen, his expression hardening. "Ma'am, have we dealt with you before?" he asked, his voice low and serious. Karen's face paled slightly. She avoided his gaze, shifting uncomfortably on the ground. I don't know what you mean, officer," she stammered. Officer Miller stepped forward, his expression firm. "Ms. Porter," he said, using her name with a deliberate emphasis. "We're aware of your history. We're aware of your affiliations." The implication was clear. They knew about her involvement with the local chapter of the Ku Klux Klan. They knew about her history of making false accusations against people of color. They knew that she was not a credible witness. A wave of relief washed over me. It seemed that not all hope was lost. These officers, at least, were aware of Karen's true nature. They weren't going to blindly accept her lies. But I knew that the situation was far from over. Karen was not going to back down easily. She was too invested in her narrative of victimhood, too convinced of her own superiority. And I knew that she was capable of anything. As if on cue, Karen let out a blood-curdling scream and pointed directly at me. "He's attacking me again." Karen shrieked, scrambling to her feet and lunging towards me with surprising speed. It was a completely unprovoked assault, fueled by desperation and pure, unadulterated hate. She clawed at my face, her nails digging into my skin. I instinctively recoiled, trying to protect myself. Officer Miller immediately stepped in, grabbing Karen by the arm and pulling her away from me. "Ma'am, you need to calm down," he shouted, his voice stern. But Karen was beyond reason. She thrashed and screamed, kicking and flailing, her eyes wild with rage. "Get him," she screamed, spitting at me. "He's a menace. He doesn't belong here." Officer Davis moved to assist Officer Miller, attempting to restrain Karen. But she was surprisingly strong, fighting them with a ferocity that was both shocking and disturbing. It was clear that she was not going to cooperate. She was determined to escalate the situation, to solidify her narrative of victimhood, even if it meant resorting to violence. "Ma'am, you are under arrest," Officer Miller announced, his voice booming. "Stop resisting." But Karen ignored him, continuing to struggle and scream. She managed to break free from their grasp for a moment, turning her attention back to me. With a feral growl, she charged at me again, her fists clenched. This time, Officer Davis acted swiftly. He drew his taser and aimed it at Karen. "Taser! Taser! Taser!" he yelled, giving her a final warning. Karen didn't stop. She continued her charge, her eyes fixed on me with murderous intent. Officer Davis had no choice. He fired the taser. 2 small prongs shot out, embedding themselves in Karen's back. She stiffened, her body convulsing with electric shock. She let out a strangled cry and collapsed to the ground, her muscles spasming uncontrollably. The scene was chaotic and surreal. Neighbors gasped and whispered. Children hid behind their parents' legs. The air crackled with tension. After a few agonizing seconds, the taser cycle ended, and Karen's body went limp. Officer Miller and Officer Davis quickly moved in to handcuff her. She was still conscious, but she was clearly disoriented and in pain. As they helped her to her feet, she glared at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. "You haven't seen the last of me," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "I'll make you pay for this." I just stared back at her, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew that she meant what she said. She wasn't going to let this go. She would continue to harass me, to try and make my life miserable. But I also knew that I couldn't let her win. I had to stand my ground, to protect my home, to protect my peace of mind. As the officers led Karen away to the police car, I felt a strange mixture of relief and apprehension. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but the underlying problem remained. Racism and prejudice were still alive and well in my neighborhood, lurking beneath the surface of polite suburban society. With Karen finally in police custody, the initial chaos began to subside. The neighbors, emboldened by her removal, started to approach me, offering apologies and expressions of support. Mrs. Henderson, her eyes filled with tears, squeezed my hand and said, "I'm so sorry you had to go through that, Jim. She's been a problem for years." Mr. Johnson offered to help me replant my garden, his voice gruff but sincere. Even Karen's husband, looking utterly defeated, shuffled over to me and muttered a mumbled apology before quickly retreating back inside his house. Officer Miller and Officer Davis took my statement, patiently listening to my account of the events. They assured me that Karen would be charged with assault, vandalism, and making false accusations. They also promised to keep a close eye on her, to ensure that she didn't try to harass me again. As they were leaving, Officer Miller said, "Mr. Thomas, I know this has been a difficult situation. But I want you to know that we appreciate you being a good neighbor. Don't let her actions discourage you." As the police cars drove away, I surveyed the damage to my garden. It was a mess. Plants were uprooted, soil was scattered, and my carefully laid plans were in ruins. But amidst the devastation, something caught my eye. It was a small, glinting object buried in the soil. I knelt down and carefully brushed away the dirt, revealing a tarnished silver locket. It was old, intricately engraved, and clearly of considerable value. I opened it, and inside, I found 2 tiny photographs. One was of a young woman in a flapper dress, her face radiating joy and confidence. The other was of a black soldier in uniform, his expression proud and determined. On the back of the soldier's photograph, someone had scrawled a name, Elijah, my love. A chill ran down my spine. I knew, instinctively, that this locket was connected to Karen, to her family history, to the deep-seated prejudice that fueled her hatred. I decided to do some digging. I started with the local historical society, poring over old records and photographs. It didn't take long before I found a connection. The young woman in the locket was Karen's grandmother, a socialite from a wealthy family. And the black soldier, Elijah, was her secret lover. Their affair was a scandal, a forbidden romance that threatened to destroy her family's reputation. They were forced to separate, their love torn apart by the forces of racism and societal pressure. Elijah disappeared, and Karen's grandmother was forced to marry a man of her family's choosing. I realized then that Karen's hatred wasn't just a matter of prejudice. It was a manifestation of deep-seated shame and guilt, a desperate attempt to bury her family's secret and to punish anyone who reminded her of their past transgressions. The locket was a symbol of that shame, a reminder of the love that had been destroyed by racism. It was a secret that Karen had tried to keep buried, but that my garden had unearthed. I haven't decided what to do with the locket yet. Part of me wants to return it to Karen, to force her to confront her family's history. But another part of me wants to keep it, as a reminder of the power of love and the enduring legacy of racism. For now, I'll focus on replanting my garden, on rebuilding my little piece of peace. And I'll continue to stand my ground, to fight against prejudice, and to create a world where everyone, regardless of their race or background, can feel safe and welcome in their own home.